Hi everyone, and welcome to the Biomechanics of Show Jumping. My name is Tim Warden. In the past 3 videos, we covered the hoof surface interaction, moving efficiently between the jumps, and how horses and riders are able to judge jumps on course and arrive at the optimal takeoff spot. This week, I'm going to get into the jumping mechanics by looking at some key concepts of the takeoff. So let's get to it. The goal of this movement is to take the horizontal speed of the horse and rider on approach and convert it to vertical speed to get them up into the air for the jump. To do this effectively, there are a number of key positions that the horse and rider need to get their bodies into at the base of the obstacle for a successful jumping movement. Stability and strength in the horse and rider are critical, as there will be large forces generated at the base of the jump. If the horse and rider are not strong enough to handle these large forces and maintain posture and positioning, then they will collapse at the base and the jump will be less effective. For the best horses and riders in the world, the takeoff is one smooth movement, while less skilled horses will compartmentalize the task. Remember that jumping is a form of projectile motion. This means that we are launching the bodies of horse and rider into the air, and the outcome of the jump depends solely on 4 takeoff variables. And these variables are the speed of the body at takeoff, the angle of the body at takeoff, the height of the body's center of mass at takeoff, and whatever air resistance the horse and rider experience during the jump. But for most situations, air resistance will only have a minor impact on the distance and height jumped. Below, you can see the different equations that allow you to take these parameters and calculate precisely how high the horse will jump, the distance it will travel, how much the body will rotate in the air, and the amount of time the body will spend in the air. While I will not go into these equations at length, what is important to remember is that speed at takeoff and angle at takeoff are the 2 variables that we can influence, and these are also the parameters that will have the largest impact on performance in jumping. Of course, the horse and rider will need to be carrying sufficient speed on approach. Proper approach speeds fall in a narrow range, with both too much and too little speed being associated with separate issues. A key concept to remember is that to jump, we need to modify the canter mechanics on approach, and we will get into more detail about that now. The first change to the canter that needs to happen is that the horse must lower its body on approach in order to get up into the air. In every single sport with a jump, whether it is long jump, high jump, volleyball, and so on, the body always has to lower before going up. Watch the trajectory of the body in this video. It is taken from a speed class with a long gallop to this jump. But you can see the body lowers at the base before projecting up into the air. How much lowering occurs is individual to the horse and is reliant on a number of factors such as anatomy, strength level, rider style, and so on. By lowering the body, you place it in an optimal position to generate force across the joints and to project the body up into the air. The critical aspect here is to have the horse lower its center of mass without losing too much speed, while simultaneously getting the hooves placed correctly underneath the horse. Looking at the mechanics of the front end, the primary role here is to start the upward movement of the body, which will set the takeoff angle. To facilitate this, the legs are placed out in front of the body for a few reasons. First, this allows the horse to lower its body at the base of the jump. If the legs weren't placed out in front, it would be impossible to lower the body in a mechanically efficient manner. This movement also acts to decelerate the body to an extent which will give the horse time to position itself for the jump. The jumping movement takes more time to execute than a typical canter stride. So if the body didn't slow at the base of the jump, it would be impossible to get into position for takeoff. Lastly, this movement helps to load the front end. With the legs placed out in front, the weight of the body stretches the structures of the front end. The structures then rapidly shorten and the hooves forcefully push down against the ground, causing the body to rotate backward and to raise the horse's front end up. This will set the takeoff angle and put the hind end in a position to explode off the ground. When watching this horse and rider, consider what the stance times beneath the hooves are telling us. The values are for the right front, but a similar trend exists for the left front as well. For this horse, the typical stance time is around 117 milliseconds for the right front during the canter. One stride out from the jump, the horse will look to lower its body. This particular horse is a bit smaller and highly explosive, so it won't lower its body as much. Conversely, a larger, slower moving horse would lower its body more in order to put it in a better position to generate force given its body composition. Then, as the front legs contact the ground at the base of the jump, they will load for a significantly longer period of time. Here the stance time is 142 milliseconds. The longer stance time allows the horse to generate way more force than a typical stride, and this is because the horse needs to now push the front end of its body up into the air while also beginning to tuck its legs. Here is data for a separate, slower moving horse's right front that shows a similar timing trend on approach to the same jump. The average stance time for the right front at the canter 3 and 2 strides out is around 160 milliseconds, which is almost 40 milliseconds longer than the quick horse in the previous video. Then 1 stride out, the amount of time the hoof is in contact with the ground decreases significantly to around 150 milliseconds in preparation for lowering its body. In slower moving horses that need to lower their body more, the stance time will decrease 1 stride out. The reason stance time decreases at this point for slower moving horses is that less force needs to be generated on this step, since the body does not need to be propelled up into the air to the same extent it would be on a typical canter stride. Instead, the horse can push off less, knowing that the body simply needs to drop closer to the ground on this last stride. Then, the stance time increases significantly to 210 milliseconds as the front end pushes hard into the ground to slow the body and to raise the front end up into the air, rotating the body backward in preparation to load the hind end. Taking a closer look at why stance time must increase at the base of the jump, remember back to my first video when I showed the force profile under the hoof. Here, the vertical direction is shown. The yellow line denotes the force profile for a typical canter stride. By increasing stance time, the horse can generate more force over a longer period of time, as shown in green. This additional force is needed to accelerate the body into the air to jump. A typical canter stride does not generate enough force to produce a jump. Now, if the horse were to try to generate the forces needed to jump, but in the time of a normal canter stride, as shown in red, the forces would peak at such a high level that they would likely exceed the capacity of the body's tissues, as denoted by the dashed line, which would result in an acute injury. Let's look at the hind end now. The front end sets the hind end up for success. Similar to the front end, the hind end also contributes to decelerating the body, although this is done 1 stride from the jump instead of at the base. As the hind end moves up to plant, the distance covered has to be short, because you are looking to complete the action started by the front end quickly in order to generate lift needed to get up into the air, while also maintaining horizontal speed to cover the width of the jump. If the horse can't get the legs underneath itself properly, maybe due to joint mobility issues or slow movement, jump mechanics will be significantly affected and the horse will struggle to generate lift. As the hind legs sweep under the horse, the hooves should land together. The horse needs to plant the hooves in a stable manner in order to load the spring, so that force can be generated to take the horse to the other side of the jump. The horse's body weight loads the structures of the hind end, which flex before vigorously extending to accelerate the horse up into the air. This launch, due to the positioning of the force relative to the body's center of mass, will cause the horse to rotate forward. Again, let's look at the stance times beneath the hooves. The typical stance time for the right hind is 150 milliseconds. 1 stride out, the stance time shortens to just 92 milliseconds. The hind end needs to be so quick that the stance time has to be shorter here so that the hooves can swing through and plant beneath the body quickly and efficiently. And then as the hind end plants, it needs to generate massive forces to accelerate its body into the air, and this process takes time. Here it is 200 milliseconds. Again, it is helpful to look at stance time trends for another slower horse. The blue bar represents the right front, which we already discussed. The red bar is the right hind. Again, you can see the stance time decreases 1 stride out and then increases at the base of the jump so the hind end can produce the large forces needed to accelerate the body up into the air. A few other considerations. The speed of the approach will increase the elastic properties of the leg. This is true for the hind and front end. So the more speed you carry on approach, the larger the stretch of the tendon and muscle will be, and the more force you can generate, assuming the horse is strong enough to handle these forces. So you want speed on approach, but the front end needs to be able to take that speed and direct it at an angle needed to clear the jump. What you want is the fastest speed that can still be managed, and the top horses in the world can control higher speeds. The last main point I will touch on here is that the positioning of the horse's head and neck plays a major role. The head and neck weigh a significant amount, so how these structures are positioned will affect how the horse will jump. A higher head carriage at the base of the jump will help speed up the body's rotation. Conversely, if the head is stuck out far in front of the horse, this will slow the body's rotation backward and require more effort from the front end to set a proper takeoff angle. Of course, if the head carriage is too high, then this will also have its own set of issues. Another thing to consider is how the rider will influence the horse's head and neck. If a rider consistently leans at a horse at the base of the jump, the horse will be less likely to drive the head and neck upward to help quickly rotate the body. This means that, unintentionally, a rider who leans into the neck will likely flatten the jump and make it harder for the horse to get up into the air. The best riders are patient with their bodies at the base and wait for the horse to come up to meet them. In summary, in order to jump, the horse needs to lower its body, and it also has to have the ability to move its legs quickly to hit key positions at the base of the jump. The front end slows the body at the base of the jump and generates lift to begin setting the takeoff angle. The hind end plants in a stable position beneath the horse, loads the spring, and then extends to launch the horse up into the air. A high head carriage will help speed the jumping motion at the base of the jump. The forces generated at the base of the jump are massive, and the horse's body needs to be conditioned and strong enough to handle these forces. If not, the body will yield when the legs go to push against the ground, resulting in a slow and suboptimal jump. Lastly, the mechanics of jumping are very specific to that task. It is difficult to find exercises on the flat that can prepare a horse's body for jumping an FEI level course. Thus, jumping has to be built intelligently into the training program to ensure the horse has the physical and mental tools needed to succeed in the ring, while also managing issues with injury occurrence. So that concludes this content on Takeoff Mechanics Part 1. Next week, we will stay with the theme of takeoff, and I will discuss how certain factors will affect the takeoff, as well as what you can learn from a horse by watching it at the base of the jump. As always, please reach out to me on either Instagram or email if you have any questions or comments.